Now, I'm absolutely delighted to have the man of the moment, Jamie Andrews. And I'm just looking here on your X, and I'm just going to say how you describe yourself. It's the handiest sometimes. Project managing the largest open source and crowdfunded experiment, conducting controls of the virological methodology. Why did I even try and read that
It's a
out?
tongue twister, right?
That is a real tongue twister. So tell us, what is it you're doing? What is this project that you're managing?
Hi, Ashlyn. Yeah, thank you for having me on. And yeah, it's really just a laboratory, a scientific look into what they were saying, the powers that be, the politicians, the globalist machinations were telling us was happening in 2020. And I started to kind of delve into some of the scientific jargon. I was just a guy on Twitter, just a person that was skeptical of what was going on. Did we need to lock 3.5 billion people down? Did we need to coerce people into injecting themselves with a vial full of unknown crap? And did we need to have any of the other machinations that were going on within that time? And so it was really a search for the truth, and that led me into the actual scientific processes and a kind of realization later on, maybe about 22, 23, that it is actually possible for you to find out the truth for yourself by going into these laboratories and essentially hiring what are called contract research organizations, who are, for hire mercenaries within the scientific community. And as long as you learn some of the jargon, as long as you learn some of the patter and some of the methods, it's perfectly possible for anybody to have a look for themselves, because we have a lot of information kind of flying backwards and forwards. What's on Twitter, memes, is this correct? We saw all of these things, IFR, infection fatality rate. We saw the use of PCR to diagnose disease. We saw infectious diseases and how they are supposedly transmitted. And without actually going into any of the fundamentals and foundational parts to this science, you don't really know. And so it was my journey, and it's still really my journey, to actually kind of uncover those things.
So you have, you mean you can speak science, quite clearly, but you also have the happy knack of being able to convey that to the layman. And this kind of makes you a dangerous individual, really, when it comes to Big Pharma, because, it's one thing understanding the science, it's another thing conveying the message to the masses. And have you found that you are a target? I mean, I'm sure they want to shut you up.
I have been assigned many people that I would say are obviously incredibly sad, and either incredibly sad individuals or must be paid by the pharmaceutical companies to slog me in every single Twitter post. So I've muted them now, so I live in kind of blissful ignorance. But I've come under a lot of fire, of course, with what I do. So, but that's kind of par for the course, really. It's water off a duck's back, and I really cut my teeth in the kind of public sphere of Twitter, where people have direct access to you. And that's really how I learned, through 2020 was kind of throwing myself into the melting pot of ideas, really, that are social media, that I actually find that way of learning a whole lot more credible for myself, because when you when you attempt a subject, you if you go through the standard measures of schooling and everything, there's a certain kind of protection around what you're learning. You learn the textbook. If you get the textbook right, you come out the other side, you get accreditation, you go into these halls of institution, and you can kind of back yourself into a corner through the kind of peer reviewed and publication thing, which is all the kind of backslapping exercise that you don't actually have to answer any questions to pretty much anybody. Whereas in the kind of public sphere, when you are there making claims, pointing out things, finding peer-reviewed and published papers, I have a lot of people that have come onto Twitter to debate, to say that I'm wrong. And it becomes a very evidence-based thing where you're fielding questions, where you're finding out for yourself. And that's really how I cut my teeth, that I just put myself in the firing line. And when you're constantly having to ask questions, when you're constantly having to have the responsibility for what you're saying online, you very quickly learn. It's, you learn on the job, as it were. And so, yeah, to kind of answer your question, yes, I have been under a lot of fire, but a lot of the time I kind of use that to my own advantage by kind of honing what I'm saying, making sure that what I have is correct evidence, at least to me. And kind of passes muster.
Did you study science?
I did a long time ago. I have a degree in geology. It's an undergrad degree from the University of Durham, where I kind of sat at the back of the lecture hall, not really paying very much attention, with my feet on the desk, and was a bit of a thorn in the side of any lecturer that was there. I had a lot of I was very interested in science. I did all A levels, geography, geology, biology, chemistry, and then went on to do geology at university. And I just found that higher education was not really my bag. I was privileged to go to a very good school, where a lot of my teachers were. My geology teacher was one of those people who was a teacher. He prided himself on teaching kids how to think and not what to think. And I think that that's the kind of real delineation between learning. And he used to have classes where he would put up a rock section on the whiteboard and say, "What do you think happened?" And that's a real kind of powerful thing and he would accept people making weird claims, and it was more about logic and figuring things out to how it meant to you. Whereas when I got into higher education, it was a 3-hour lecture with, the lecturer with their back turned to you. And then 3 hours later, half of the, class were missing and gone, and we'd gone to the pub, and that was it. Any questions? No. Okay, bye. See you later. And it was just, if you're in attendance, if you're not. And for me, I really saw the projection of what higher education and probably the commercial side of science was playing out to be, and decided that I would prefer to try and make it in the music industry, stupidly.
Music,
that was
really?
a poor decision too, but there you go.
Well, it can't be, because you're in one of my favorite places in France. Am I allowed to say this? Am I allowed to give you?
Of course, yeah.
So you're in France, and I lived in France for 5 years.
Yeah.
Of course, it's very, very hot there at the moment.
It is.
How are you finding the French? I know, like, say, during lockdown and all of that, they really fell into line, quite surprisingly, for a country that was well able to say no, no, no. I didn't think the French would succumb so easily.
It's a really great question. Thank you. Yeah, the French are funny that they have this kind of real dichotomy. They, through 2020, and this is what has inspired me somewhat to do this, is that there was a vaccine mandate, vaccine passport, sorry. Essentially a vaccine mandate to be a part of society, a really strong and grave thing to make for an entire country to make myself and my family, who refused the vaccine, to be a second-class citizen in the country that I live. We were not allowed into sports facilities, bars, restaurants, even soft play centers for my children. we were ostracized and treated like subhuman. And that to me was a real, tipping point to actually how scary kind of politics and the general masses are towards some of these notions. Now, I will caveat that with the French are funny. Obviously, I've had the direct comparison through 2020 with the rest of my family back in the UK. So apart from Scotland, I don't know if they had in Northern Ireland or Ireland, but they didn't have a vaccine passport. Some of the masking regulations were slightly more laissez-faire. Whereas in France, it was, I attempted to a couple of times to walk around supermarkets without a mask on, but you would be harassed, harangued, and eventually, if you actually wanted to buy something, they would refuse you service. And so they ruled with an iron fist on high. But what I will say is that because the French have had such an authoritarian, very openly socialist for such a huge amount of time, there is actually a large undercurrent of people that have completely disassociated with the state. And so you get these enclaves where you can kind of remove yourself from politics. Macron stood on a mandate of around 5 million votes, which is less than the population of Paris. So very few people kind of engage in those national politics unless totally necessary. So there is an undercurrent of actual kind of, I wouldn't go as far as to say anarchy, but, disillusionment with the state that potentially the UK is really kind of struggling to get through. This kind of like, would the politicians actually do this to us type thing. Mm-hmm. I think that there is a real kind of need for a shake-up in the UK. So yeah, that's kind of a long question, but yeah, a long answer to your question. But yeah, it's I love it here. I love it here that I've managed to kind of forge my own path away from this kind of system infrastructure here, where I grow my own food. I have a syndicate with people whom rear animals that I can get meat from. And so through 2020, I kind of made myself a little bit more kind of independent, off grid. I took my house that I'm building here mostly off grid with solar panels and things like that. So if 2020 comes along again, I'm not kind of dependent on the state for having to do what they say, as it were. And I think that that's quite an important thing for anybody that is fighting for freedom, that to be a little less dependent on the state and to be a little bit more independent and take responsibility for themselves.
Yeah, I mean, I think it was a big shock for many of us to find ourselves just spat out. I mean, I just thought everybody was going to go no together. I just had assumed all these things. But then I realized anytime I make assumptions, I kind of go, oh, I shouldn't have made that assumption at all.
Yeah, and, I mean, I forgot to say that probably a real kind of enlightening thing is that there was a manif, protest for the vaccine mandate and for the vaccine passport. And that was one of the kind of heartening things in France is that when you watched the mainstream media, when you watched the kind of political play out, myself, my wife, my children probably assumed that we were in the absolute minority. But we went to our local town, Agen, here in the southwest, for a protest for the vaccine passport protest. And there were around 8,000 people on the streets in a town/city of about 25,000 population. So nearly, 40% of the entire population of that town or city were protesting the vaccine mandate. And it really was quite heartening that they had gaslit so many people to think that they were isolated, to think that they were in a vast minority of people by going against this. Whereas actually, when we actually got out into the streets, when we actually looked around, it was all walks of people, all ages, and all creeds and colors that came together that just said, this is clearly ridiculous. And that was a real kind of heartening change. And it was only kind of a few months later that they dropped all of this stuff. And so I think they realized that that they had a really big problem on their hands.
And they tell us, protests achieve nothing. There's no point in protesting. There's always this undercurrent. Don't bother protesting. It doesn't work. What did you get out of it? But you get that. And it does show you're not alone. And it does mark a punctuation point in history that, that people came together and said no, whether it worked or not. It does to a certain extent. But I want to go back to your X account because you've been pumping out some really good stuff. One man show. And I've got to say, very engaging, but also reports that may have gone under the radar, like this one from the BBC. And I think this story tells us an awful lot, and we'll unpick it. I'll play the report first and then we'll have a chat about it.
Lancashire have been speaking of their shock today. Four brothers from Lancashire have been speaking of their shock today after all being diagnosed with prostate cancer within the space of a few months. The Hastings brothers, who are aged between 64 and 70, have no family history of the condition, but they heard a discussion on BBC Radio Lancashire and decided to get tested. They've been speaking to Jonas Moore.
Jim, Tim, Steve and Andy, the Hastings brothers from Edenfield near Rosendale. What they also have in common is prostate cancer.
It's surreal.
Yeah.
For the four of us, isn't it?
Between September 2023 and March, April 2024, we'd all come together and had confirmation that we all had prostate cancer.
Steve, the eldest at 70, was the first to have a check known as a PSA in August 2022. That flagged up concern, but the cancer diagnosis only came this summer.
So I now await my radiotherapy treatment to start. I'm on a hormone treatment at the moment, slow-release hormone treatment, and just, as I say, await the test to come through early next year.
Tim, the youngest, was next.
I actually went to the doctors for something else, but whilst I was there, I said I hadn't done an MOT for a while, so he gave me a blood test. I've put a lot of weight on, 6 inch on the waist, 2 stone, feet swell up, ankles swell up, hot sweats all the time, but I'm quite happy. It's better than the alternative.
The cancer has affected them all differently.
So I've had my prostate removed. I had mentioned Tim and Stephen. They said we've been slightly raised. They then fast forward me onto the process of having the scans, and I was found out to have prostate cancer.
And you were the last one?
Unfortunately, yes. I was the last one, 13th of May this year, after the brothers had said, get yourself tested. And I thought, well, 4 of us, maybe one, I might have one in 4 chance of escaping this, but I didn't, to be honest. So.
They want to raise awareness and say Sir Chris Hoy sharing his experience recently is helping.
We've had Sir Chris Hoy come out with his prostate cancer. That's had a huge impact.
Shock.
Now, I'll pause it there because it goes on for another little bit. But one thing we see about those 4 brothers is their trust in doctors. Like, you'd think between the 4 of them, they might have turned to each other and goes, they might have at some point gone, is this a scam? Are we being scammed here?
Yeah, I mean, the likelihood that these tests are anything specific, coming back with that kind of 4 out of 4 is astronomically small. When people get into the testing scam, and this is really what we saw in 2020, is that they have a catch-all net with tests. So they roll the tests out, say that if you test positive, there is this clinical, pathway that you need to follow. With COVID, that was, during the heights of the scamdemic was very bad, with the likes of midazolam and morphine and intubation, that if you were subjecting yourself based on one of these tests to the medical institutions, you had a very high risk of essentially being suffocated to death, intubated and barbiturated to death. But that has kind of, they've taken the gas pedal down a few notches with the virus stuff, but now we see them rolling it out in the oncology department instead. And people may not be aware that they are using exactly the same scam with testing scams. Now, they might kind of bury it a little bit with acronyms. They say PSA, which is an antigen test. And an antigen test is very similar. Well, it is the test that you have with the little sticks that they have, that they rolled out in the during the scamdemic, which is where you spit on it and then the two lines come up, and it tells you supposedly whether you have a deadly virus or not. Now, you can do this at home. You can falsify these tests at home, which I have done. You can put, there was actually a group of school children that started to do this to get off school, was they put Coca-Cola on these tests. The Coca-Cola test positive, and therefore you know that the tests are not testing for the exact specific thing that they're claiming to test for, i.e. they are fraudulent. Now, the establishment rolled out a cover story that it was something to do with the acid in Coca-Cola that was, quote, breaking the tests. So I did about 200 of these tests using all sorts of things to see whether this was true. And things like lemon juice tested negative. Things like vinegar actually tested, completely destroyed it. But things like Coca-Cola tested positive. Also things like vodka, gin, high-grade alcohol, which are all pH neutral, tested positive, even in a peer-reviewed and published paper. Distilled water, bottled water tested positive for one of these things. So when you look at these four brothers that have gone in and are doing supposedly antigen tests to test for quite a serious thing that has a serious pathway with it, prostate cancer, just know that they are using these tests, which if you tested them with vodka or gin or Pepsi Zero, then they could be testing positive too. And so this is the ultimate kind of problem with them is that they are not specific. They claim that they are specific to exactly what they want them to be, which is whatever they want them to be. So an infectious virus in quotation marks, or cancer. And the problem is that they are now going and they are superseding in the same way that they had antigen tests. They showed that they actually took these antigen tests off of the market during 2020 because so many people were falsifying them at home. They now have the gold standard of PCR. So it's genetic testing. And this is soon to be being rolled out in the oncology department. As we saw with the recent, what I would call marketing, or psychological operation from Jeremy Clarkson, that the establishment are desperately trying to roll out this catch net of testing to get as many people back into the clutches of the medical establishment. And the dangers of that is that once you start, medicating for these things, being applied with these sorts of drugs that are knowingly dangerous, knowingly have, ironically, a lot of the side effects which they are claiming that they are there to stop, of the diseases that they are being rolled out to stop. This is the danger, that you kind of get yourself into this treadmill of death and disease that I say is from the allopathic death cult, i.e. the medical.
Well, yeah, it is a death cult. There's no doubt about it. When you scratch the surface on it and start examining it in any way, shape or form, the conclusion is this is some kind of a death cult. This is really bizarre what's going on. But like, if you look at Jeremy Clarkson, so he apparently had the COVID, and then was pushing AstraZeneca. Then he got COVID again, allegedly. He's never said anything about. Well, he's kind of he's alluded to the clots, but always jokingly. You know, you've more of a chance of getting killed by a cow, and then his cow nearly kills him. So he's always kind of playing with words on these things. He's never quite being totally honest. He's very alluring for the public because they think, oh, he's one of us. You know, he is on his farm, and he's gone through all the hardships of a farmer, and he's with the farmer, he's with the little people. So they have this kind of brainwashing that goes on. And then when he says, go out and get tested, lie if you have to, I mean, I was reading the comments underneath, and it was just quite depressing. I'm like, you idiots. Like, they were all going, I'm going out to get tested now, Jeremy. You know, because they were trying to please him.
His kind of persona has been very carefully crafted, you know, by the establishment as being the bad boy, you know, that will say anything that kind of goes against the grain. But it's very transparent when you kind of view it holistically, that it's bad boy within a very tight Overton window of, you know, completely agreeing with the narrative. So it's, you know, and when you look at the media campaigns that surround these people, it's very obvious to see the trajectory, because every single time that a new issue is proffered by the establishment, they dive right in and are on the wrong side of it, basically, like you point out with COVID and more recently with prostate cancer. And prostate cancers, you can tell that it's being used for exactly that thing. And Jeremy Clarkson was used exactly for this as well. Being a man, there is a lot of stigma around the previous ways that you could test for prostate cancer, i.e. a digit up, boom. And, you know, as a bloke, it's off-putting that you don't want to do it. So this is the perfect thing for the establishment to say, hey, you know, you don't have to have this degrading thing to, you know, now find out whether you have a life-threatening disease. You just go in, you take a blood sample, and we'll tell you whether the antigens or the molecular diagnostics are there. And so you can really see that they are using this as a platform, as a springboard for mass testing with these tests. And there is nothing about whether these tests are legitimate, whether they work, whether they actually tell you what they should do. And the prognosis of people that haven't got tested, test positive, test false positive, any of the kind of playouts of that as to what happens if you just don't take the medication, what happens if you actually feel, you know, and even worse, we see the same kind of asymptomatic ruse rearing its ugly head as well. Even if you feel perfectly fine, please do go and get tested to be told whether you don't feel fine, but you do, or something. You know, it's a bizarre situation.
Well, we're in this odd space again where the celebrity circuit is being used. So initially, say for the COVID, it was cough, cough, oh, I've got COVID. I got tested, now I got COVID. You should get tested too. So now we're in this really unethical. So that was bad enough. That was really unethical. But now we're in this other space where the celebrities are all saying they've got cancer. Now, maybe some of them do, all right? Maybe some of them are genuine. But I would say a lot of them are not genuine. Having worked in that celebrity sphere for 10 years or so, I know that a lot of them would only do that for money and contracts and their agents working out deals. They're not going to do anything free for a big pharma, a multi-billion euro big pharma company. There's a lot of exchange and money going on. It seems like the most unethical thing in the world. There's a guy here who's gone to jail for pretending he had cancer and scamming a load of people. So like, it's like the worst of the worst thing you could possibly do. But I'm hoping that the public are going to start growing up, essentially, and becoming a little bit more aware that these celebrities, no matter how charming or how friendly or how chummy they seem to be, they're not your best friends. And a lot of the time they've taken money to pretend whatever so that they can sell you either a test or sell you. Now it's like selling chemotherapy and radiation and my cancer journey. And it's gone into like something so dark and unethical.
It is. And, you know, people are ascribing themselves. I mean, this is the unfortunate thing, that when you meet people, sometimes, you know, unfortunately, there are vast numbers of people in my social circle, in my in-laws' social circles, in my family's social circles that are being diagnosed with cancer. Off the top of my head, I can think of a couple that are in their 30s right now that, are being told, a poor lady that's being told that she's going to have a double mastectomy. And it's one of these things that you notice almost kind of a bit of a change, that people, once they go in for these diagnoses, they get told, and they almost want to ascribe themselves to the diagnosis, which is almost, they want to introduce that they have cancer before they tell you their name. It's kind of, you live this diagnosis, especially with the big C, as it were, that it's kind of, it's a bit all-consuming. People, there's been such an aggressive marketing campaign, such an aggressive, because it's the pharmaceuticals cash cow, for all of these claimed remedies, claimed cures, which don't actually have great prognosis. And we can go into it in a little bit, but this is the greatest, cash driver for them, which is why they're spending so much money up front on these celebrities to run these media campaigns as the initial catch net for getting people on board, putting them onto this conveyor belt of kind of death and disease. And once you start to use these drugs, for instance, chemotherapy IV, which was designed from mustard gas, nitrogen mustard, that was used as a toxic agent against the enemy in World War I trench warfare. They literally injected that to start off with, and now it is a more powerful derivative. It's a more potent derivative that is going intravenous. And so the medical model is, and it doesn't really matter what you choose, it's all toxic, it's all damaging, whether it's radiation, physically burning, microwaving your body, whether it's cutting, physically slicing open and, spilling whatever is, causing an issue, if there is an issue at all, and it's not asymptomatic, or chemically poisoning people intravenously with chemotherapy. These are the problem areas. There's even one recently that I shared, monoclonal antibodies. People kind of think, oh, okay, well, that's got quite a kind of jovial thing. This is nice. The pharmaceutical company, I forget the name of the company off the top of my head, but they did a test in London where they took 7 men for these monoclonal antibodies for leukemia treatment. They were on a drugs trial. They got a few grand to do it, and afterwards I definitely think that they regretted it, because all of them nearly died. They swelled up, and they said that this was the event was called the Elephant Men of Northwick Park, and their whole bodies went into massive edema, vital organs shut down within kind of minutes of being injected with this monoclonal antibody. They got to the end of it. A guy lost large parts of his arm, his hands had to be amputated from high-grade sepsis that came along. They got to the end of it, and they took the drug off the market, rebranded it, lowered the concentration, and put it back on the market.
Well, consider Trump. Remember when Trump apparently had COVID and they were apparently using remdesivir on him? Yeah, they were. But they also tried those whatever they're called, antibodies. And then it turns out that Trump was sharing the same golfing spot as your man who was the CEO. So they'd obviously done some kind of a deal, and they've a place out the road here in County Limerick as well. So it was all like, isn't this amazing? We've got Trump and he's flogging this, and he tried it himself. This is how naive the public is. And I say to people, do you actually believe he had it? And isn't it funny that they were in the same golf club? Don't you think that's a bit odd?
It's the
What
same
I-
as Boris Johnson, right? That it's
Yeah.
kind of, they use all of these celebrity figures to push whatever they want, right?
But it's relying upon the naivety of the public. And I suppose it's a kind of a false idol worship to a certain extent, because the false idol worship of these people, that they believe that this actually happened, that they had COVID, that they narrowly escaped the ventilators. In other words, they narrowly escaped it, but everybody else who was in the same area ended up on the ventilator, a lot of them dying. But, the naivety of the public to go, well, wasn't he just lucky? It was just very lucky that he was on remdesivir and escaped. But I'm going to play another one of your videos, if I can find it here. This is the Larry Ellison one. Let me just pull this up.
So we're currently working on. Should I step on this? Okay. All right. No. I'm not that tall. I'm not that tall. I'm not that tall. You look even better. Thank you, Mr. President. One of the most exciting things we're working on, using the tools that Sam and Masa are providing, is a cancer vaccine. It's very interesting. It turns out, I'll be quick, all of our cancers, cancer tumors, little fragments of those tumors float around in your blood. So you can do early cancer detection. If you can do using AI, you can do early cancer detection with a blood test. And using AI to look at the blood test, you can find the cancers that are actually seriously threatening the person. So we can, again, cancer diagnosis using AI has the promise of just being a simple blood test. Then beyond that, once we gene sequence that cancer tumor, you can then vaccinate the person, design a vaccine for every individual person to vaccinate them against that cancer. And you can make that vaccine, that mRNA vaccine, you can make that robotically, again using AI, in about 48 hours. So imagine early cancer detection, the development of a cancer vaccine for your particular cancer aimed at you, and have that vaccine available in 48 hours.
So that just sounds amazing, Jamie. I mean, that really, for anybody, say, tuning in, they'd say, wow, they could customize this to adapt to my cancer and kill it. Incredible. What do you say?
To me, that it was so eye-opening, having been, to right to the kind of ends of virology, and potentially realizing that maybe, the virus thing was just a little bit of a kind of a side project, as it were, because I think that they've run their course with virology, and effectively it is genetics. When they talk about a fake virus, it is just a string of genetics. And to me, it was a real kind of eye-opening thing, that it was like, maybe they've just been going for the cancer thing all along. And I think that that's what's happening here is that Larry Ellison, Sam Altman, and the big orange what's-it savior, Donald Trump, have released $500 billion of investment into AI infrastructure that's why they're building all of these data centers now, to essentially tack into the genetics scam. And there's a couple of things that I want to pull out that Larry Ellison says that he's very particular about. There is genetics, cancer genes floating around in your blood. Firstly, cancer is not caused by your genetics. That is a hoax. I mean, genetics, DNA, RNA in general is a hoax. That's a kind of wider topic. But you know that genetics does not drive cancer, because there have been plenty of experiments that have taken a oncogenic nucleus, so a nucleus that has cancer in it, and the cytoplasm of a healthy cell. And if you input the nucleus of a cancerous cell into the healthy cytoplasm of a cell, it does nothing. It doesn't create a cancerous cell. In fact, a lot of the times the cytoplasm mitigates that cancer and becomes healthy. And conversely, they have taken cancerous cytoplasm and put it around a healthy nucleus, and the cell remains cancerous. So you know that it's nothing in the nucleus that is causing cancer. To add to that, there have been plenty of mass screenings, and this is kind of the kryptonite of any of these sciences, is control studies where they take and they mass screen healthy people. So they mass screened, I think it was a few thousand people for standard cancerous genetic sequences, and found up to 80% of people were testing positive for all sorts of cancer. So you know right there that the entire thing is fraud. And what should be scary is that what these people are suggesting is that not only should you be going out and you should be getting these tests, which are invariably going to say, essentially, everybody has cancer. That's what they want to get to. You know, every single person has cancer. When they got to the end of that, when they got to the end of this mass screening, they said, actually, we think that some of these cancer genetics are actually developed from fetal cells. Right, they're claiming that fetuses just have cancer, and this is why everybody tests positive with cancer. Not that the tests are junk, that somehow there's some kind of interplay between when you're in the womb that you have cancer or not. It's a farce. But really, the play out of this, and I hate to use the phrase, because it's a bit cliche, but should scare you really, that they want to mass test everybody to tell them that everyone has cancer, then create vaccines off of the back of this fraudulent data to then inject you and say, look, either you don't have cancer anymore, which is what they've done with HIV for a long, long time, is take a fraudulent test, tell you that you have HIV, give you a drug that makes the test negative. It doesn't do anything other than make the test negative and say, here, we've solved the problem. So there is this pipeline of having fraudulent tests, a drug that turns the test negative. You take the drug, which also has a few niceties rolled in there, that it will cause all sorts of degenerative diseases if you take it for long enough, that we can then pass you on to the next department within the medical establishment that can then juice you for all the money and health that you have, and then kind of spit you out the other side. So they are rolling this out with cancer, with PCR tests, and with genetically designed vaccines as a whole pipeline for milking you for money, milking you for tax dollars that they're going to reinvest back into this, and slowly just poison you until you are completely dependent on the medical system, pill popping, and you're in a old people's home. And
it's a form of war, really. It's a new style of war. What is your take on, say, the COVID jabs? So now we're hearing that they were packed with SV40, the things that used to give mice tumors so they could pour the chemotherapy in. This is what Angus Dalgleish has said. So now I'm wondering, is this a psychological operation where now people are imagining that they've been poisoned, and now they think they've got cancer? Now they're off to get more tests to see, do they have the cancer? Is this a kind of merry-go-round, or has the SV40 actually given people cancer?
Certainly, great question. It's obviously a bit of both. I will say up front that it's quite clear that you can take a vaccine and you can get past it, right? I mean, it can't be that everybody's dead, right? Every single person that's taken this vaccine would be dead of some sort. The stuff in the vaccines are junk. most of the time before the quote mRNA came along, it was just what we were studying for the virology control studies project, which was the cell culture. So it's just noxious shit in there, really. It's monkey kidney cells, fetal bovine serum, which is the fluid from around the heart of the cow. The problem areas that you come into, apart from kind of just general junk, like anything injected into your veins is bad. Saline injected into your veins, ironically, can induce flu. And anything that has that immediate effect, that's why drug users and abusers eventually end up going intravenous, is because the effects of the thing in the vial that you're putting into are basically instantaneous. They bypass all of the natural biological filtration mechanisms in your body. Once you break the skin barrier, once you're going directly into the blood, it is the pathway for all deterrents. If you actually think about what happens in nature, the only things that kind of look to break skin and inject stuff into you are animals and insects, snakes and spiders and scorpions that are looking to deter people. Stingrays, they break the skin barrier, they inject a poison into your body to deter you. This is the kind of very logical thing that you should kind of take away with anything, not just vaccines. Now, the SV40 claim, that's I know that is bollocks. The fact that viruses do not exist. We've proven that by showing that there has never been an isolated virus through the control failures, the negative control failures that were shown as part of the project. What they're doing, and I know the scientists that this claim came from, and I will tell you that actually ironically, they didn't conduct a negative control themselves. They said that they found, using the PCR test, using genetic sequencing, that they found this particular code in the vaccine. Now, they didn't actually have a negative control where they tested healthy people or non-COVID vaccines. What they did was they tried to take other people's research and use it themselves, which is actually not particularly great science. And they got mostly, slated within the, scientific community about that. Now, I will caveat this with the fact that I'm not saying that it's not, there's not toxic shit in there. I'm not saying that the stuff in these vials cannot cause cancer. It can. The thing that probably needs explaining more is how cancer is made, how cancer comes about. And I'm writing an article about this, a book as well, that it's obviously, as I said before, it's nothing to do with genetics. It is a dysregulation, just a pure imbalance within cells, and how that is diagnosed. If it's not diagnosed fraudulently with genetic tests such as PCR, then they will just look and see that the cells are just physically different. They are physically morphologically different to a healthy cell. And so there are basically any of these injuries, insults, chemicals input into your body can create cancer. They can create an imbalance within your body. And so when you're talking holistically about the question, can it cause cancer? Are these cancers all from the jab? There's not a simple answer because everybody is different, right? You can have somebody that had every single booster go into them possible, but if the rest of their lifestyle was that they weren't eating junk food, that they didn't drink alcohol, that they don't smoke, that they stay relatively healthy, active and fit, then there's a possibility that their body can detox it just, fairly happily. They will probably have, ironically, a few bouts of the flu, blame it on COVID, come out the other side and be okay. Whereas you could have somebody that had one that, and I kind of glazed over this, that a lot of the problems within these vaccines is the metals that are in there. Originally thimerosal of mercury origin, now currently aluminium, and all of the kind of other ionic content of these things, which is, in my opinion, what is causing cancer, what is causing dysregulation and imbalance at a cellular level, is the ionic change that these metals and these chemicals are causing at a cellular level. And so when people are injecting themselves, you can have somebody that, had one injection, but also leads, a terrible lifestyle of eating junk food every day, drinking to excess, smoking to excess, all of the things that everybody within the medical establishment, no matter whether you are alternative, naturopathic, homeopathic, all agree that all of these things, create ill health, as well as a large part of it, which is your mind. And I think you slightly touched upon that psychology as well. You get told that you have cancer, you get told that you could have had cancer, you get told that there are invisible pathogens floating around that could suddenly make you choke on your snot to death. Then living in that kind of state of constant fear creates disease as well. So it's a deadly combination of small amounts of poisoning that can, if you believe the establishment and subject yourselves to what they're saying, then you can go in, you can test positive because you have made your body slightly out of balance by taking some pharmaceuticals, by being stressed out. And all of a sudden, these thresholds that the tests are measuring test positive. And I'd like to kind of clarify that is that through our research into PCR, there is some sort of feedback between ill health. So I believe that in fact, the medical establishment tell you, the scientific establishment, the genetics establishment tell you that the PCR is measuring charge. It's measuring basically, positive and negative ion difference. And when you are sick, when you are expelling this to bring your body back into homeostasis, into balance, you are expelling a lot of this ionic stuff. You could call it, magnesium, phosphate, whatever, or any of these kind of elemental things are coming out in higher amounts in your mucus, in your snot, in your spit, to bring your body and back into balance. And the PCR test is measuring these types of things. So there is a correlation between being ill and it testing positive in general. And so this is where the real danger is that it's not as if you can not see this kind of decent pipeline where people have been partying. And this is what happened within the HIV era, is that people were partying, people had this drugs lifestyle, a kind of debauched lifestyle. They were feeling ill. They went, oh, what is it? They got themselves tested. All of a sudden, they have this lifelong disease. And the way that you can tell that this is not correct, or a lot of the reason how I found out about the PCR test, is because there are people that are called, they neatly call them elite controllers, because these are people that have initially tested positive for HIV, which they tell you is a lifelong genetic disease, that they refuse to take the antiretroviral medication for it, that causes them to test negative, but they test negative anyway, or their viral load is very low and stays low and they remain healthy. And this is a real kind of thorn in the side of the medical establishment, because they tell you that, HIV, once it integrates into your genome, you have it for life. Yet there are these people, and they just pass it off as magic or witchcraft, that they all of a sudden start testing negative. So you kind of know that when these people, and obviously they get away with it because they drug, 99.9% of the people that test positive, have gone in there because they believe the whole story in the first place. And so once they give them the drug, once they give people chemotherapy or radiotherapy, you kind of lose that control. You lose the control, the placebo group of the kind of, the unvaccinated. You and me are the living embodiment, the proof that we didn't need a vaccine, and
and we weren't afraid. And we didn't buy into it. But if you look at, say, the AIDS industry, like those red ribbon events, breast cancer industry, pink ribbon, these are multi-million euro areas, industries at this point. And, you have to go along. I've been to many of these events over the years, and they're done exceptionally well. And you'd swear they were saving the world. And if you say a word, you're the worst in the world, because people know they've got sisters, they've got brothers, they've got, relatives who they love dearly who went through this story. So there's this huge emotional connection. So anybody who puts their hands up and says, well, I think we should question this, is the worst in the world. But, if you follow the money, you realize this is a major, major money spinner.
Yeah, I mean, it's exactly the same as now, people running in the London Marathon or whatever with breast cancer, and just the amount of billions of pounds that are being funneled into these things through charities is just eye-watering, really. And what have we got back for it? Well, we've got cancer rates that are on the rise, and they're, rolling out even more marketing schemes to get many more people on board. And so they like to play the moral card, of course. We saw it with the Cobra meetings. What was that group of people that were brought in as people like Susan Michie, who, they're all behavioral psychologists. Very few of them were actually, virologists or immunologists. It was all behavioral psychologists to make sure that people were being controlled and manipulated into following the orders, right? They pitted each other against each other by introducing these moral dilemmas that were just completely fabricated. That, how would you feel if the posters of, you could kill granny with a cough or whatever,
And the psychological effect that had on little kids who to this day thought that just by breathing that they could kill their granny. Like, what a terrible thing to do to kids. But in Ireland, we had two professors. So we had Professor Luke O'Neill of Trinity College Dublin, and he was the guy that kind of won out because the media pushed him so much. And then we had Professor Dolores Cahill. Now, she was a virologist from University College Dublin, but she did sound the alarm. And she was probably one of the most famous scientists at the time. Before she sounded the alarm, then she was demoted. She lost her job. The cops were after her. I mean, it was shocking. But she did warn people. She said, don't touch those injections, the COVID injections. But instead, we got Professor Luke O'Neill all over the mainstream media, whereas Dolores Cahill was sidelined, smeared, and then eventually disappeared now because she's not even allowed to have a platform. But I'm going to bring you back to June 2020. So this is Professor Luke O'Neill on Claire Byrne Live. Now, Claire Byrne is an RTE presenter, and she also played the central role in pushing the fear of this virus and very much then pushing the injections afterwards. And it was all kind of built on trust and trust the science. But anyway, have a look.
Luke, we have it of the virus.
This is the virus, isn't it amazing? And Nikki did a great job making the virus. This is 3 million times magnified, by the way. It's 3 million times smaller, and this is the deadly thing. Okay. We can measure this in this machine. This is a PCR machine, by the way. You can measure the virus to detect if you're positive.
So this is where you would test the swab sample to see if somebody has the virus in their system.
The RNA is tested in this machine. Now, very importantly, these spikes, see them? They look like this, by the way. They look like little golf tees. They stick into your lungs, and now the virus goes inside your lung cells, and hey presto, you're infected. And these spikes are very, very important for us, our understanding of this virus.
Okay, now the little blue thing that you have there, that represents the antibody. That's your defense.
Yeah, so the immune system, in 99% of people, Claire, people have a great immune response and fight this virus. They make antibodies, and there is an antibody molecule, Y-shaped molecule, that locks onto the spikes and stops them sticking in, like blue tack in a way. The whole goal is to make lots of these antibodies in a sense, and naturally we make them. Secondly, a vaccine, of course, drives production of these magic molecules, and now loads of antibodies, and now you don't get infected when the virus comes along, I guess. Okay. So the antibodies are key to the whole vaccine business.
We all want a vaccine. Where are we at with vaccine?
So there we go. We all want a vaccine. And this actually got into people's heads. People began to say, we actually all want a vaccine because this deadly virus is on the loose. But where do you stand on the spike protein? Is that a thing?
Again, it's one of those ones that, I think was kind of a carefully crafted, kind of controlled narrative that kind of reified this non-existent virus. And you see here, and it's hilarious, really. And I kind of run a weekly, kind of funny meme thing on Twitter where I will point out that basically none of these scientists that are rolled out as experts can actually show you anything other than cartoons. When you ask for them, and it's hilarious because, and I do this now more with DNA, because there are no images of DNA. They don't exist. And all they have is these kind of animations, or as we saw there, plushy toys, to bring onto national television, and they kind of demonstrate these things as existing because they can hold them in their hand and then kind of wax lyrical about how they kind of come about. Now, the protein scam is kind of the same as all of the biochemical scam. It's the same thing, and without wishing to get too kind of down the rabbit hole, all of these things within biochemistry are all the same. They are all essentially measured in the same fashion, whereby you take colorless liquid that comes out of a biological sample, and you say, because it plots here in gel electrophoresis rather than here, it means something completely different. And really there has been this kind of classification thing going on within the halls of science for a couple of centuries now, where scientists can kind of say, based on this test, we have something that we have control over. We can tell you that there is this protein that is called some random long string of numbers or letters, and we can make a drug that controls this protein or this whatever input, whatever you want, hormone, antigen, antibody, all of these things are the same thing. And really the key to understanding this is actually the tests themselves. The tests that test for all of these things, which is the superseding test to a PCR test, is called gel electrophoresis. And it's such a stupidly simple test. It is a dish with a jelly in it, a bit like an agar-agar if you are to make a jelly. So cooks might know this. If you make a kind of gelatin, something that needs a jelly-like substance, you may use agar-agar, and it's a little bit like that. It's polyacromide, which is kind of a synthetic version of that. They fill this dish with a gel. They put 2 battery electrodes in it, literally positive, negative, from what is essentially a car battery, a DC voltage. They put a sample in one end, they turn this thing on, and then however far the sample migrates to either pole, the cathode or the anode, they make up this incredible story. It could be DNA, it could be RNA, it could be viruses, it could be proteins, it could be hormones, it could be anything, depending on how far the sample gets from one electrode to the other. Now, I think that that's a pretty dangerous game to play as an inference, where an electrified jelly in a dish determines whether you're going to die, what drugs you take, whether you have an infectious disease, whether you have a genetic mutation that runs in your family, whether you are guilty of a murder. All of these things are possibilities as to how far a sample gets along a jelly.
And how much you trust the science as well for the people.
And how much you trust the people interpreting that. These things are all inferences. And so when you talk about the spike protein, just know that what they're talking about is how far a dye has moved along a jelly when you put a battery charge across it. And when he's pointing to this PCR thermocycler, on the thing and saying, this is how we test for it. All of these things you can really kind of make head nor tail by doing what is called a control. So that's what my project does, is take these things, remove the thing that they're studying, and rerun the test again. So you are essentially seeing if the test is actually correct by taking the thing away that you are testing and running it again. And I mean, they've done this themselves. Unfortunately, they've kind of failed. In 2020, every single reagent, every single kit that they sent out, the PCR kit, 80% of the labs tested positive their negative control. So their negative control is water. So they put all of the PCR ingredients together. Instead of the sample that said to contain a virus, they just put water in it, and it tested positive. And they had to kind of do this recall. So they recalled them all back, and they said, okay, well, it was contaminated in some parts, but in the other parts, they said, okay, well, we couldn't see that there was any contamination through manufacturing. What actually happened is that the PCR primers primed themselves and tested themselves positive.
Right.
They call it primer dimer. Okay. And so these tests are testing themselves positive. And so from that, you can kind of extrapolate out that, well, are any of these tests, when you actually get a positive, how could they just be testing themselves positive? I mean, I don't believe that is the case all of the time, but
where there's vast amounts of money involved, you could say, right, well, at least the very least you do is question it. But what about the immunohistochemistry staining? Say people in Ireland in particular, because the autopsies, nobody's died from the injections, the COVID injections, apparently, in Ireland. But then they don't seem to be looking for that either. And there was one theory that, if they use the immunohistochemistry staining, that they'd be able to figure out whether there's spike protein from the COVID injections.
Yeah, this is the problem. This is the problem with kind of using the establishment's tools. Is that the same kind of play out happened with the ostrich farm in Canada? If people followed that story, where this unfortunate, and I won't say that they're too unfortunate, because I'm pretty sure that they got a hefty payout and were kind of a little bit in on it, if I'm to be perfectly frank.
Yeah.
That they got told that a few of their flock had bird flu. They were told that their flock were going to be totally euthanized to save the spread of this non-existent pathogen. And their kind of recourse was to bring in a lot of alternative experts, so people that are supposedly against this idea that bird flu to them is a contagious, or to them is a dangerous virus. They all obviously think that it exists, but this is the problem with kind of taking still within the Overton window of kind of accepting the fraudulent science, but trying to kind of eke a way out of it, is that their recourse was to test the birds some more. They thought that, and it plays out exactly the same, is that they wanted to test the birds for bird flu antigens to say that they were immune and therefore they didn't need to be euthanized. They test them, they came back negative, or they didn't come back, negative enough, positive enough for the antigens. And what happened? They euthanized all the birds, and they're dead. They're gone because they used these same fraudulent inferences to try and tackle the fraudulent tests themselves. I mean, and this is to play out that is going to happen when you take for granted the ultimate keystone of what is the tool of the establishment: the PCR tests, the antigen tests, the protein tests, proteomics. It's all the same stuff. It's all in the hands of the people whom make it difficult to access any of the equipment, right? They put this barrier between us and them, and that's why they had to roll back the antigen tests that you could get on a stick, because all of a sudden you and me had access to these things. We could just go, oh, if we put Coke on it, then they bust. They had to take that away because it was becoming all too obvious that these tests were junk, right? And so they want to keep putting it behind this kind of brick wall of, now they're moving it onto genetic sequencing, which takes a machine that's worth £1 million that only people that have a PhD can have access to. Yeah. It's the whole kind of Wizard of Oz behind the smoke, behind the curtain type thing. Is that they have this entry point that is, you have to be accredited, you have to be published, you have to be peer reviewed to even get in the same room as these things. And so
we had Professor Luke O'Neill and Claire Byrne, who I showed you before. So they were on radio there recently. And Professor Luke O'Neill was saying, well, we don't need the PCR test anymore. We can bypass that. And we're actually testing the sewage. So we're testing pee and poo, essentially, to see if there are any nasty viruses down there. And then public policy and health policy can set whatever controls they want. And we could have lockdowns all over again. That actually went out on radio and barely anybody notices. I mean, I'm isolating it frantically, putting it out there, waiting for a reaction. Barely anybody's reacting. I'm like, did you hear this? And then, you're like the nutter. But I'm going to finish off with another one of your videos that you put up on X. And again, it's funny. I mean, it's nearly comedy at this point, except that the repercussions are so grave. And we've already seen it. That's the thing. We've seen it with the COVID scam. We know how far they'll go. We've been kicked out of society. They've done it before. They'll do it again. And it's all hinged on whether the public buy into it en masse. I mean, that's what it's all hinged on. The hantavirus, I thought, great, because people really pushed back and then it disappeared. But okay, let's play this and then we'll have a little chat.
Man has described the moment he was almost bitten by a seabird suffering the highly contagious bird flu strain. Hayden Nelson joins us now with the details from Port Elliot. Hayden, good afternoon. What's the latest?
Well, Tash, this bird was washed ashore after it flew into the middle of a bodyboarding competition here at Knights Beach near Port Elliot and became stuck in the brake zone. But it was 39-year-old Aaron Brand, the bodyboarder taking part in this competition, who saw the southern giant petrel appearing distressed and tired, thinking it had a leg injury, going up and appearing to try to reach it. It was collected by local wildlife rescuers, and 2 weeks on, it's now been confirmed as the third case of this highly infectious illness.
But it just was, disorientated, didn't really know what it was doing, tried to take a little snap at me, and luckily missed.
It is possible for humans to catch bird flu, but you have to have really close contact with an infected bird. And by that I mean you have to be touching the bird.
Authorities haven't wasted any time taking precautions, throwing into lockdown the Wildlife Rescue Centre, which collected that bird in the first place. A second suspected case of the deadly strain has been confirmed in a bird that tested positive near Dunsborough in WA. Tash, a top Australian vet hospital, SASH, says its monitoring suggests these are isolated cases, could eventually lead to a mass outbreak and mass bird kill, putting the poultry industry on high alert. South Australia's Premier says 120 million chickens are at risk in this state. Concerning too for the
There you go, 120 million chickens at risk. And it just shows you, we know there's some really bad people in charge who'd love to starve us. You know, they'd love to take away everything from us. Because they're satanic. We've got a glimpse of them from the Epstein files. These guys, you know, people don't quite realize the evil that's running the world right now. And they would use any excuse to take away our freedoms and to starve us. And that's why it's funny, but it's not really funny, you know, this thing.
Yeah,
and it
that's right.
shows you how it could be used, how this corrupted system can be used against us with our own consent.
Yeah, I mean, it is comedy. I mean, the kind of bad hammy acting of you know, a large. I mean, it was a giant petrel that they're seafaring birds that are known to fly for incredibly long distances, you know, migrating from place to place. It was obviously knackered and unfortunately plopped into a bodyboarding competition where it was harassed by, you know, this surfer dude that was obviously, you know, felt that it was stealing his, you know, limelight in the competition. So it's presented in, you know, that kind of grave, sincere tone, and the whole thing really is, it's projection, isn't it? You know, they say one knackered petrel gets tested positive and all of a sudden it's extrapolated out to, you know, millions of numbers. And this thing and these types of things are the standard kind of problem, reaction, solution that is the state. And I like to, you know, give the analogy that it's like war. It's like we're told that people like Saddam Hussein had weapons of mass destruction. And if we don't go in there and kill him and kill everyone around him, then probably, maybe, likely, who knows, potentially everybody might die because he might, you know, set off a nuke. And lo and behold, you go in there and nothing's happened, and whoopsie, it was, you know, and Dr. David Kelly tells you, but then whoops, he's dead, and oh dear. You know, it's the projection, and the projection is that our insider knowledge tells us that that bird that was just trying to have a rest after flying quite some distance is harboring a deadly pathogen that we can't prove exists. And so, and is only kind of reified by the fraudulent test that tests positive by itself with water if you test it wrong.
Yeah.
And so,
and our imaginations, like movies like Contagion, which Professor Luke O'Neill, he was telling kids, make sure you watch that. The UN has sanctioned it. I think they were even involved in the filmmaking at some point. And so they want to get into people's imaginations that, you know, you could cough on somebody else or just touch them, and then that sends it on to the next person. And then before you know it, the whole world has got this infection and, you know, could die.
Yeah, the idea that, you know, your neighbor or your loved one can cough and kill you, that's the fundamental fraud of germ theory, and is used by the psychological operations department of Hollywood, the state, local and mainstream media. You know, it's and it's a kind of revolving door, you know, where we've just, like you said, we touched upon the hantavirus hoax. We've just had a kind of flurry between the hantavirus, Ebola. Just shortly before that in the UK, we had meningitis, and they've all been very quickly. And I've been really, you know, happy with the response of, you know, the COVID dissidents, shall we call them, that it was very quickly put to bed, that it was very apparent that the majority of people were not falling for these latest testing hoaxes that they were having. Now, with Ebola, with hantavirus, they're going to try and tell you that there's this disease that kills 40% of the people that it infects. And that's a pretty difficult one to play out when people were getting them and it's fine. They're testing positive and, it's not 40% of people that are keeling over and dying. It's also a little bit more of a difficult entry for them because, for instance, hantavirus, to test it, it was a PCR test, but you have to take cerebral spinal fluid. So you had to have a spinal tap to get it out of you. And the general public, although a lot of them are sadomasochists, aren't really that willing to go with the charade that they will, have their spine, decanted of a little bit of fluid to prop it up. So they've obviously realized that that kind of ran its course over a couple of months, and now they're switching back to the bird flu. So it'll be a revolving door where, the UN Agenda 21 kicks in with the, controlling of meat, the controlling of the food supply back in, which is why they use the bird flu one. It's the bird flu, it's TB, bovine TB. There's also a kind of Jeremy Clarkson special where, there was a guy called Mark Purdy who spent his life showing that CJD and BSE was a cause of organophosphate, insecticide that was poured along the spine of mandated to be poured along the spine of cattle that had the exact neurological diseases of CJD and BSE that caused it within people and cows. And there is a revolving door with the germ theory fraud that is used to control our food source, used to control the economy through lockdown and the movement of money and business, absolutely killing and crucifying small to medium enterprises and bolstering globalist organizations. It is used to control basically every facet of our living. And so it's really fundamental for people to understand the core of the fraud that's going on here, to remove themselves from the fear and being so easily manipulated into the political hoaxes, and more importantly, poisoning yourselves for these fraudulent things, because that's what makes you easy to control, as if you are sick, if you are dependent on the system, and then you are easy to control and easy to pigeonhole and put in these boxes. If you are, they don't want you being awake, intelligent, healthy, capable individuals.
Yeah, and I mean, I'm sure whatever hoax they'll do next, they're going to poison some people because they need fear to be their driver, don't they? So I think people need to understand is that they don't mind killing. Killing's no bother, as long as they can drive the fear. So there could be some poisonings here and there. So I think people have to be aware of that too, that yes, there could be actual mortality. But that's not necessarily evidence of whatever virus that they might be pushing next. So I think, it's a level of cynicism. People have been very naive up to this point because they have put their faith in false idols and celebrities and doctors, in the science. Trust the science became their mantra. And this is something, and their imagination became their worst enemy because they were told to believe all sorts and they acquiesced and consented to it. So it's a big moment in history for humanity. Is like, are you going to grow up or not? Because the price to not growing up is like you're joining the death cult, or you're going to choose life. Like, it is incredible. And I just want to know, what is it that drives you? Because you really are forced to be reckoned with. You're one person, you're pumping out this stuff. We have a bit of a platform now on X. You're using that opportunity. And, it is a sight to behold that one person pumping out information that resonates, that you can test, you can verify yourself, has this incredible repercussions and can break through thousands and thousands of lies. It's the power of the truth that you can test yourself. What drives you to do it every day?
Oh, thank you. That's really kind. It's not just me. I work with there's probably about 50 people that contribute to the Virology Control Studies project. Most of them, are, tenured scientists, or at least very recently tenured scientists within the halls of all sorts of microbiology, genetics, virology. It's just that their jobs would prevent them and prohibit them from being public about it. I speak to so many people behind the scenes that have helped me learn about their subjects, and I've helped them learn about their subject, ironically, that to get them to kind of understand that sometimes a lot of the protocols and they're coming to me as well, that they're kind of saying, okay, I watched some of your videos and I kind of had to look at the assays that were going on in front of me, and I've gone, actually, we're not controlling for these properly, and why are we doing these things? I approach these things with a childlike fashion, which has enabled me to do it. One of the key things is that I have no skin in the game, and it's a blessing for me to be able to do what I'm doing, because I can approach things with a childlike manner that lead to these kind of questions that need to be had, which is, what does that do? Why is that there? And what does that mean? And a lot of the time within these areas of science, I found that actually those answers aren't really there, or they're, you find them, the answers are not really that eloquent and that convincing. And so the thing that drives me is to make sure that my children do not experience 2020 ever again. It's as simple as that I will not live in a world where I'm made, and my children are made, a second-class citizen in the country that I live in, where I'm not free to walk around and go where I choose unless I inject myself with a bunch of toxic crap. And so it's a very easy one to just get up and do it. And I find it kind of interesting, and I find the area, there's just no shortage of problems within this area. I have every single weekly publication, the topic for it penned for the rest of the year on Substack already. I am not short of stuff to write about. It's just never ending. The level, like the amount of ridiculousness within these scientific subjects. And so it's an area of fascination for me. It's a constant learning, and it was really the realization that anybody can come to the truth, to find out the truth for themselves. And this was one of the things, is that I don't regard myself as a scientist, and I kind of balk when people suggest that I'm a scientist. I just think that I'm after the truth. And in fact, I don't really like science, and and more I've kind of learned about it, the more I think that the whole thing is corrupt and purely for kind of political means. And but I really, I have set myself the task to prove that virology is fraudulent, to make sure that 2020 never happens again. And that culminates, I realized very, very quickly after doing the cell culture isolation and after doing the microscopy work, that really the entire thing rested on genetics. And so this is, and it was a difficulty for me, because it was a realization that it was actually a topic change. I had been used to the idea that it was biology, where it's got nothing to do with biology. It's all chemistry. And I didn't particularly like chemistry when I was at school. I did an A-level in it, but my kind of chemistry was rusty. But that's kind of been the real kind of awakening for me, was the realization that the chemical and chemistry side of it is just as kind of ropey and as the kind of biological side. So that's where I find myself. It's been a lot of, and right back to the kind of start of the interview, you said, that I managed to break it down for the layman. And that's the way that I learn, is kind of being able to simplify a lot of these jargon terms, simplify what is actually happening. And that's been a real kind of difficulty within the area of genetics, purely because the mountain of jargon and what I call bafflement is purposefully input to make sure that you have to be really quite dogged to get through this, get through the tsunami of bullshit that they input into this study, because they don't, within the PCR, within genetics, they don't even have a picture or video of it occurring.
Yeah.
Yet they will tell you exactly this thing combines with this thing, combines with this, and this play out here. They'll tell you every single chemical from here to kingdom come is happening with this, with zero evidence. And so I've kind of had to simplify all of this down for me to be able to understand. And so that part of it hasn't been easy, but once it's clicked in my head, it's been something that's kind of driven me along, and I've inspired other people to do it. Albert Matthews, that I've worked with, that we studied the second cell culture specifically for SARS-CoV-2 isolation with vero cells and the microscopy work, came along and was inspired by me and wanted to do his own studies. And so really I hope to inspire other people, and not just within virology, and I call it, just truth seeking. It is perfectly possible to find out the truth by using these scientific organizations, and whatever that be. Is there too much lead in the water? Is there too much lead in the paint? Is there, stuff in chemtrails, the types of things that they're spraying in the air, the food, the water? All of these things are perfectly possible for you, for me, for anybody to actually study themselves. There is not a when it comes down to it, and the way that I have organized the Virology Control Studies project is it's crowdsourced, it's open sourced. If it's a topic that is of interest, get groups of people, and this is how we started off, just a Telegram group that came together, that we all chipped in a couple of £100 and we did the studies. And right. If you are motivated to find out the truth, to get to the bottom of it, it's easy.
And where can people find the study if they want to get in touch?
So we release all of the results that we have. It's completely open source. I release it on Substack, which is at Control Studies, or the Virology Control Studies project. Type that in. We also release it onto Zenodo, which is a EU repository for all scientific open sourcing work. So you can come to your own conclusion. You can take all of the results. You don't have to reference me. You don't have to even believe what I say. You can just see the results. We took video of the first experiments, of the experiments occurring. So there is the inside of the laboratory, the lab tech that conducted all of this stuff, so that you know that it happened. It's a little bit more than I want to be more transparent than Big Pharma and the current medical and pharmaceutical model, which do everything behind closed doors. So that's kind of what I'm teaching about, is open sourcing, being transparent, letting people come to their own conclusions with the results that we have, releasing it, crowdsourcing it so that you own these results. It's not owned by me, it's owned by the people that have put money towards the results. So you can take the results, write up your own description of them, sell it, put them on people's in the local councillor's office and say, I have done these experiments and found out that yada, 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 your local PCR testing, you banned me from this, you made me wear a mask, you tried to coerce me into injecting myself. There are plenty of legal recourses and legal avenues that you can take to protect yourself. I can't do that for you. You have to kind of do it somewhat for yourself. And so I'm just kind of here to educate you that you can do it. It's not that difficult, and you can have a little bit of fun doing it.
Yeah, and stop farming it out. Stop waiting for somebody. You know, for many years, I also, oh, somebody else will do that, or somebody more knowledgeable will do that. You know, kind of take a back seat. But now this is the moment. No, we're all having a growing up moment. Each and every one of us, you know, individualized, customized to each of us, which is an amazing thing, really, where we're at. So, listen, we've been going for more than an hour and a half now, Jamie, and I know you've got work to do. So, I'm going to leave it there. Anything else you want to impart to us before you go?
Yeah, I mean, there's some really exciting stuff happening for the future. I had a film. I have a documentary film being made about myself and a few of the other notable people within the kind of no virus community. Dr. Stefan Lanka, Mike Eden is on there. A few others. That's going to be called The Claim. That should be coming out hopefully at the end of the summer. I am currently, and I can't talk about it too much, but I'm currently at an experimental phase, specifically on the PCR and genetic testing. So fingers crossed that the results come out roughly at about the same time. So I will have a little bit more to kind of tell people about there, and what I've been working on for the past couple of years. Actually, it's been quite a long time to kind of come to fruition, but this is where I'm at, the genetic side, and we're going to put it all on the table. And so I'm very excited about that kind of coming out the end of the summer, maybe start of autumn, and we are going to make a bit of a splash.
Okay, I'm looking forward to that. So, I mean, really what we're witnessing here is not only virology falling to pieces, but the science is in tatters because of your work, and you know, a few others. It doesn't take a lot of people. That's how powerful.
No, that's right.
It actually doesn't take a lot of people. It just takes a bit of bravery, a bit of courage to go, actually, what's that? As you say, simple questions. Anyway, I'll leave you to your afternoon. Thank you so much for talking to us, and I look forward to seeing how your next projects unfold. Thank you so much. Take care, Jamie.
Thank you, Ashlyn. Thank you.